You
All
know?
people who perform or are visible are subject to people hanging around. And I just wonder in the minds of some famous people tonight if there isn't a little concern about how easy it is to be hung around.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, there
Personal
are
security.
yeah. Some people have bodyguards, you know, and some people, I guess, like John, just felt that he didn't want to live that way anymore. I mean, the great ironic tragedy about this is that he practically stayed home for 5 years and came out this year to make music. And, you know, last night, I mean, I just still can't believe it. But last night when Yoko and John were coming home, they were coming home from the recording studio where I believe they were remixing some of Yoko's songs. And this was a source of particular pride to John because, you know, Yoko really took a lot of bad raps. And a lot of people felt that her music was just wildly uncommercial and noise. And when I saw Yoko this past summer for the first time in a long time, I said, you know, you were way ahead of your time. All the punk stuff that's happening now, Patti Smith, Lena Lovitch, Nina Hagen, all these singers, the B-52s, they sound like you did 6 years ago. And she looked at me and she said, really? You know, and then she was at that time writing songs, and so was John, and they didn't announce it until later. But what I was going to say was that they went out to make music now, and I think that they were possibly thinking of performing live or doing something, whether having a concert or not a tour. John told me he didn't want to do 40 cities in 6 weeks. He'd had that. But he missed being with Sean, and yet he still felt that he wanted to create. And he said, you know, it's the real turnabout of the liberated woman. He said, because I find myself saying to my son, well, Daddy wouldn't be happy unless he was making music now, so you have to understand that I'm going to the studio and I'm going to do these things. And yet he was a little conflicted about it. He said he missed the time that he had spent with Sean. And just being able to have all those little moments, watching him say a new word for the first time or doing something for the first time, all of those kind of things were really special to him. And then this happens.
Thanks for coming by on a difficult night for yourself. Jack Douglas first met John Lennon in 1971 as an engineer on the album entitled Imagine. He produced his last album, Double Fantasy, and was with the musician and his wife last night. He is joining us this evening to discuss the plans that John Lennon had for the 1980s and the optimism he had going into a new decade with a revived career. He did see the 70s as being a time off, didn't he? He was looking forward to doing something completely different during the 1980s.
Well, he saw the beginning of the 70s, as we all did, as a time for me, a time for us all to say, now I'm going to do something for me. I've spent the 60s fighting for the cause, whatever cause it was. And he was looking at the 80s as a time to say, I'm going to do something for me, but I'm not going to step on anyone else to do it. I'm not going to exclude anyone else. And that's what he was looking for in the 80s.
What kinds of plans did he have, Jack? What was he looking forward to?
Well, I think the first single off the album, which was called Starting Over, which we picked while we were doing the album, was the feeling that he wanted to have for the 80s, that we are, in fact, in the 80s, we are starting over, that it's time to be optimistic about the future, that it's time to write off George Orwell in 1984. It's time to forget about those things, that in 84 we can have what we want if we work together and for ourselves. There were other songs on that particular album that represented what he wanted to do and what he wanted others to do. For instance, Cleanup Time. What he was trying to say is that it's time to forget about drugs. It's time to forget about alcohol. It's time to take a look at what you have around you, your family, and to take advantage of it, because those are things that are really meaningful.
In watching the replay of the interview, I was interested when he and I were talking about the possession of marijuana, and he kept referring to it, dope, 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 and I was thinking to myself, and we've all fooled around with that stuff, a little grass now and again, or alcohol, booze, whatever. If it's all so great, why do they call it dope? It makes you dopey when you stop and think about it. If
True.
it's so great, why do they call it dope? It was interesting to hear him talking about that.
That's true.
He must have been very pleased, and yourself as well, that the album Double Fantasy was a tremendous success. I believe it's gold already, heading for platinum. The response to it was remarkable.
In fact, yesterday while we were working, David Geffen came up to the control room.
Now, identify him for me.
David is the president of Geffen Records,
Okay.
on which John's album is distributed, and he came up and he said, "Well, congratulations, boys! 2 weeks out, and your album is gold and quickly headed for platinum, and the single is going to #1." And John was just thrilled. I mean, he's been there many times before, but after 5 years, he just jumped up and down like a kid. He was.
During the production of the album, was there any negative anticipation? Gee, we've been away for 5 years. Maybe it won't be so successful
Oh,
so quickly?
absolutely.
Jitters, really.
John was definitely one to play himself down. He didn't consider himself John Lennon superstar, but more John Lennon artist, hoping that other people would understand what he was trying to say. He didn't take it for granted that people would just go out and buy his records. He hoped they would. But when it was starting to happen the way it was, he was just thrilled. He was like a kid. He was very happy. And on top of that, yesterday, we had just finished mixing a new tune for Yoko.
Go ahead. In 1968, you came into the business as a producer. You were just...
I was a musician before that, and in 1968, I was part of the smoke dope, take acid generation, riot in the street, and go mad, and I was listening to that White Album, and I said, by God, what I really want to do is produce records. I said, that's really what I want. And I said, there's probably nothing more than I'd want to do is produce the Beatles or produce John Lennon. And then after a lot of hard work, being janitor in a studio and finally becoming an engineer and working with John in '71, there was an immediate communication, almost the kind of communication that a fan feels when he listens to a Beatle record. It was there. It was there when I met him. There was an instant warmth, and we became very close. And then I started working with Yoko. Now, previous to that, the engineers who were working with Yoko were running out of the control room when she was starting to work. But I understood what she was trying to do, and it was appreciated by both John and Yoko. And we did a lot of work together. And after the 5 years, I was coming back from Los Angeles, and I got a telephone call from Yoko, and she said, John and I want to go back, and we'd like you to produce. And my first reaction was, hallelujah, but not because I was producing the album, but because he was going back to work. And I think after I hung up the phone, I realized, wow, they've asked me to do it. I mean, that's truly amazing.
How did you get through the night last night?
I didn't get through the night, really. After returning from the hospital, I went for a walk all the way down to Grand Central Station. I live uptown, and I hung around Grand Central Station for a while, and tried to make sense out of a completely senseless act as best I could, because I had just left him at 10:30, and we were feeling really up. We were meeting again at 10 o'clock in the morning to continue our work. We were feeling really good. The album was gold. It was on its way to platinum. Yoko was receiving the kind of press that we had prayed for and that was making John very happy, and everything was going well. And after it happened, I heard about 20 minutes later, usually because I only live 2 blocks from John, I ride uptown with him every night in the limo. But I had another session after that one, and I was in my session. I was told that John had been shot, and we just immediately went to Roosevelt Hospital, and of course it wasn't long after that we realized he was dead.